Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome. You can hear me through the microphone, yes? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Welcome to our Keynote Speaker Series lecture, Horn of Plenty, from Opera to Fitness Training. My name is Rebecca Wojdiak, and I have the privilege of working with the Vancouver Island Symphony as the Development and Outreach Manager. Welcome to everyone joining us here today and online. As I happily do at every lecture, I would like to acknowledge the support of our keynote sponsors, Pinnacle Pharmacy and Long & McQuaid Musical Instruments. With their help, yes, please, thank you. With their help, we do video film these lectures, and all of them are available for viewing after and continuously for free on the Vancouver Island Symphony's YouTube channel. So if you'd like to watch this lecture or share it with somebody else who might enjoy it, please look up the Vancouver Island Symphony on YouTube, and all of the lectures for this whole season, and actually last season, are all there. Now, just to say, this will take a few days, so it won't be online until the following Monday. And speaking of days of the week, I'd like to remind those of you who are series committers to these lecture series that next month's lecture is on a Tuesday. It's not on a Thursday. It will be on Tuesday, March the 10th. That's not a change. That's always been the case. But all of these lectures have taken place on a Thursday in this room, and the one in March takes place on a Tuesday. So just note that if you're planning to attend, it's the same room at the same time, 2:30 on March the 10th. This talk, the one in March, will be presented by Cosette Justo Valdes, and she will speak about her concept, collaboration, and vision for the final concert of our season, Romeo and Juliet. However, today, we can look forward to a presentation from somebody with great diversity. Heather Walker is a professional horn player and splits her time between the Vancouver Island Symphony, the Vancouver Opera Orchestra, and many other orchestras in British Columbia, and between the concert hall and the fitness center. Some of you may attend, well, most of you may attend her classes, which she teaches some of them in this very facility. This afternoon, Heather will invite us backstage with her and connect the dots between music, movement, and well-being. Please welcome Heather Walker.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such a pleasure to see so many faces and many of them familiar. So thank you. If at any point you can't hear me, just let me know. I'll be switching because I'm going to be demoing a little bit of information, so it's here and there a little bit. So yes, I am a professional French horn player. I've played French horn since the age of 10, so most of my life. And I've played with the Vancouver Island Symphony for almost 24 years, I believe. So I actually was living in Vancouver when I started as a musician with Vancouver Island Symphony. And as this is considered a regional orchestra, it's a smaller town. We do have musicians that live here, but many other musicians that come from elsewhere to play with the symphony. That's how I started. I was living in Vancouver. I started being able to play horn here, and we'd come over for concert weekends and perform and go back to Vancouver. And I finally thought, Nanaimo is kind of an interesting little town. Maybe I could afford to live there. So I've now been a resident here in Nanaimo for 15 years and playing with the symphony that whole length of time. I also have two other careers other than professional musician, which I'll kind of interweave in today to the talk. One is teaching a postural and movement education called the Alexander Technique, which came from me directly out of my horn playing training and career. There was a direct link, and I don't believe I would have been a professional horn player without my movement education and posture training that I did. And from there, with my joy of movement, and I've recently, in the last year and a half, been teaching fitness for 60 plus for City of Nanaimo. So many of you had that workout with me this morning at Bowen. And it's also, I feel, very related in a way to performing professional music. There's some really interesting connections between all three things. So I'll try and talk a little bit about all of those aspects of my life. It's really just storytelling and getting you to enjoy some things, maybe some things about the French horn that you never knew before today. So maybe I'll just start there. This is a French horn, for anyone who doesn't know. This is a French horn. There are somewhat different types of French horns in that they have simpler ones with a bit less tubing and less complications, which they start younger kids on generally. But it's a pretty modern instrument overall. With all this valve design in the way it's designed here, this is considered a modern French horn, meaning in the last 100 years or so, they're able to make them like this. It comes out of a long history, though, which I'll talk a little bit about so you can actually understand the music and some of the music we play in the symphony and the context of it. So it's basically a glorified piece of plumbing. I mean, really, it's a long piece of tube. And the instrument itself does not make any sound. All it does is amplify the sound I'm making and make it sound a bit better. So how we actually make the sound is with our lips and with our airflow. And we simply buzz our lips together. I won't do it in the microphone. It sounds like this. Okay, so I'm just buzz my lips. It creates this funny sound, which I can control by tightening my lips up and down and blowing air differently. When we're trying to kind of warm up our lips, sometimes we'll use what's called a mouthpiece ring, because when I'm playing in my horn, I'm playing into this little piece of metal that's called the mouthpiece. And it's got a ring on it. And if I take the mouthpiece ring, whoops, that's not a good start. If I take the mouthpiece ring and buzz, you'll hear that it's a little bit more clear because it keeps my lips sort of more focused. Sounds like this. Right? So I can make these funny noises up and down with this little piece of metal circling my lips. These are all the things you never knew you needed to know about the French horn. But it's kind of fun to know. Then I'll take the mouthpiece and I'll play there, and you'll hear there's a different sound again. Right? So I'm starting to be able to get quite a different range of sounds, even on this tiny piece of metal. But it's all done with my lips and air. And then I put that mouthpiece into what is essentially a long tube at this moment. And I'll play some sounds on that tube, okay? Same buzz. Now, just notice, I didn't wiggle my fingers for any of those sounds. I'm going to do it again so that you see I'm actually just playing through one long tube to start. Okay? See my fingers? So, this brings us to a little bit of physics. This is your physics lessons for today. When you buzz into a long tube, we get something that's called the harmonic series. The tube resonates at certain intervals. So those notes I just played are spaced quite far apart, low down. There's some low notes, but it's a big far apart space. And the faster I buzz and the higher I go, the more the notes are spaced closely together. And those are the natural notes for that length of tube that pop out. It is called the harmonic series. That actually exists in all resonating instruments. There's a harmonic series of resonation that is quite specific and different for physics. Even in a violin string, for example, it's resonating at different frequencies depending on the length, and the harmonic series has to do with all that. We won't go more physics than that today. But if I lengthen that tube, the series of notes I get are slightly longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play all open, no fingers, and then I'm going to push down my second finger, which adds this tiny length of tube right in the middle. Can you see that? A tiny length of tube, and you'll see what happens. add some tube. Right? Add a longer tube. Okay, so I just did a progression where I made this one big tube slightly longer by a half step down, slightly longer again by a whole step down, slightly longer again by 1.5 steps down, and then I can keep going through that series until I've essentially played every note needed to play music. It all is very interesting in that it affects the history of the music written for French horn and how we play the horn. So everything we do has kind of to do with figuring out the length of tubing, the buzz of the lips in the air, and what different combinations we can use to make this work. So it's quite a fascinating thing. So I'll go back in history a little bit to describe that. Hopefully you're all following me so far. So the modern French horn comes out of what was called like an early hunting horn, right? Which was basically just a long tube wrapped around 2 or 3 times with a bell. They figured out, if we blow into this tube and buzz our lips, it gives us a few notes, right? Which I can play, sort of a jumping hunting melody type thing. I'm just making that up, right? I mean, those are my available notes on that long tube. But what I have here, which is just kind of an old family heirloom, my grandfather got this in Switzerland in the 1950s, is a super tiny little tube. It just wraps around twice inside. This is just leather that is wrapped around it. And it just wraps around twice. So this tube is only about 3 or 4 feet long if I were to unwrap it, right? But this really shows you what can and cannot be played on this. Sorry, logistics here. Okay, so all brass instruments essentially work the same, but they have different physical characteristics that change them. As you can tell, that sounded a lot more like a trumpet, because a trumpet is smaller, and because it's smaller, the notes available are higher and more clear, kind of more direct sound. There's also a difference in physics between what we call conical and cylindrical brass instruments. So trumpets and trombones tend to have a very narrow and even tube the whole way, and then at the very end it just flares out. And French horns and tubas are more like a cone in that it is a slow flare throughout the tube. A cylindrical instrument, the trumpets and trombones, have a much brighter, more direct sound because of that straight physics of the tube. And the French horn and the tuba, the conical instruments, have kind of a softer, mellower sound. Hopefully this is all interesting to you. You have no choice, really, but I'm getting into all sorts of interesting physics about it. If any of you know a flugelhorn, so trumpet players sometimes put down their trumpet and pick up a flugelhorn, which flares out more. So they've just changed from a cylindrical instrument to a conical instrument, and then that flugelhorn has this mellow, rich tone that's different. So it's quite fascinating with all of those differences. So we started with, historically, these big hunting horns that were in a big circle, and they just had a bell. And they were actually made in a really huge circle so that you could put them over your head and arm and carry them while riding a horse, or into battle sometimes, but mostly for the sort of fox hunting type thing. And then they would lift them up and be able to play these signals that was just a selection of what notes they had available for that length of horn. Does that make sense? And they would play these signals, and it would mean, and they could hear them a long way away, and it would mean something different. Something like, hey, we found the fox, or come meet us, or we're going for beer at the pub, or whatever their signal was, right? And in Mozart's day, the next concert we're doing, by the way, in March, is Mozart's Jupiter Symphony. So, and I'll be playing with my colleague, the other principal horn of the Island Symphony. And in Mozart's day, we were still dealing with this natural hunting horn with some variations that they had figured out. So basically, there was no valves yet. They hadn't got the technology for the valves. But they had these long tubes, and they'd figured out, oh, different size tubes gives us different range of notes. And somebody figured out if we flip the horn and put our hand in the bell, we can do some funky stuff too. So I'll demonstrate. We're going to show it a couple times so you can see what I can do with my hand to fill in the notes that don't exist on the physical harmonic series. Okay? So, no fingers, notes exist. Those are the only ones. And then I'll show this with my hand. One more time. Okay, so I am not an expert in the hand horn, but the hand horn is what would have been used in Mozart's day. My colleague in the symphony, Andrew Clark, who plays principal horn, is an expert on the hand horn. He played many years in Europe. He played with a lot of the early music ensembles in Europe, and he has that whole hand horn, natural horn thing down at an expert level. For me, it's considered a different instrument. That's not my training. But I'm hoping maybe next year he'll give a keynote talk, because he and I have this completely different world coming together with the French horn. It's very, very fun. So I'm more like a person that I have a car, I can drive it from point A to B, I'm a pretty good driver, I like driving a car, no problem, it's fun, that's my car, right? The French horn. Andrew is like one of the mechanics that takes cars apart and rebuilds them and knows everything about the insides of every type of car. He owns 23 French horns, all from different eras of the development of the horn, and he's played them all in the music they were written for, the historical music. So he could give an entire lecture just on that part of the history of the horn, right? So it's pretty fun though, because when we play Mozart's music, for example, coming up in March, we'll be playing the Jupiter Symphony. Mozart wrote that for a certain length of French horn to get certain notes to match the key of the symphony. So in that particular case, that's horn in C, it's called horn in C, and my horn is written at a certain length that it's a horn in F. Gets complicated here too, I'll try and keep it simple enough. But basically, because of this history, horn players got to the point where they not only had a circular horn, but they had sections of the horn, a piece of tubing, they could take out and put a different section in that was shorter or longer, so that suddenly they could change keys and have a different set of notes available. It was still a natural horn, they were still using their hand for the missing notes, but they could change keys by flipping a piece of tubing out and a piece of tubing in. It was called a crook. So I'll just show you, all of these tubes do come in and out. I can tune my French horn, I can clean my French horn by removing these tubes. So on this side, there's the main tuning and all of these. While I'm at it, these all come out, and then I'll empty it. Okay, so these these on a modern horn are called slides, tuning slides. But on a Mozart-style horn would be called a crook, which would actually change the length and change the harmonic series. What I just did, one of the things you'll see us do that often in orchestra, is I actually just emptied some condensation out of the horn. because it is a metal instrument and it cools down, and we're blowing very warm air into it, so it actually condenses into water inside the horn. And we often, during a piece, have to flip the horn, take out the tubing, shake it out, get the water out. And the trick with the French horn is figuring out where the water is stuck in all that tubing. So that when we're playing different valve combinations and we hear a gurgle in one specific valve, we think, oh, I think I have water in my second valve. But then you got to know which way to flip the horn and wiggle the valves to get the horn to run down to the other valve so you can whip it out, pull it out, and dump it out quick enough before you have to play your music for the symphony. So it's part of, some people say it's spit. It's really not. It's mostly just condensation that happens depending on the temperature of the room. I also, on the back of my horn, have a tiny valve right here that we do call the spit valve, even though it's not really spit. That's for like urgent, like when we have no time, we have to play a lot of notes, and suddenly you start hearing this gurgle in your horn. You're like, whoa, I got water in my horn. And then we just go, right? So it's that fast. I just lifted that little valve. I made a tiny hole up here. I had the horn hanging so the water would have run down to that point at that time, blow through it, try and get the water out, and then jump back to playing my notes. Yeah, so it's all kind of interesting, complex things about the horn. So just back to Mozart's time, he wrote 4 French horn concertos. Mozart really loved the horn. He was an amazing composer, of course. He had a good friend who was a hand horn player at the time that was incredibly proficient. And they were real jokesters. He and his friend they just constantly played jokes on each other. So almost all of Mozart's original music written for French horn, for the French horn concertos, has jokes all the way through it. The ink is written in different colors. He plays tricks on the horn player. He writes the tempo twice as slow as what it should be. So the orchestra's playing twice as fast and the horn parts has the tempo wrong, essentially as a joke. He writes silly comments in, silly things about the horn player in the concertos, because he's basically making fun of his friend who was playing these concertos. It's kind of a funny addition to that. I'll just play the opening of a Mozart horn concerto so you just get a little sense of what it sounds like. Remembering, I'm going to use my valves because I'm not a hand horn player, but remembering that people were doing this all by moving their hands in the bell to get the different notes. It's quite fascinating. Okay, let's see if I can get it. See, there's water. I don't know where. All right. Okay, so that's just a little example. I'm not really a soloist, but I'll play little blips here and there. That's a little example, the opening of Mozart's Third Horn Concerto, which would have been played all on open notes except for the hand stop notes. I can give you a little demo, but it's dubious how good it is, right? I'm not a hand horn player. It would sound something like this. Oh, and you'll notice I'll stay just with that one finger because that's the length of tube, right? Right? Except the guys that are really good at it make it sound way better, and they actually make it so that that funny stop sound is not so obvious, so that it actually it doesn't sound quite like a modern horn, but it sounds much more homogeneous in the sound than what I'm doing. That being said, that history still influences written music today in that we have special effects that we do with our hand, even in most specifically in modern music, more modern music, meaning last century or so, that they know that we can wiggle our hand around in the bell and make funny noises. So it's actually often written into the parts. So that's something we call hand stopping. And it's more for the brassy effect, the real sound of a real hand stop. It's a little bit complicated. What I have to do is close my hand really tight to block the air. And as I'm closing my hand in, makes this horn a half step shorter. So then I have to think about the note I'm playing, play the fingering for 1/2 tone lower, and blow the air for the written note. It's really complicated. Like when I have stopped horn in an orchestra piece coming up, I'm practicing it. So to make sure I've got the right fingering, the right pitch, and the right combination of factors to get that sound. But it sounds like this. So I'm doing this in and out to get that sound. And can you hear there's water in my horn? I'm talking too much. There we go. So, when we have, like Mahler uses a lot of stopped horn. Even at the Cuban, who was at the Cuban concert last Saturday night? Yes, the arrangers, it was really fun. The arranger used a fair bit of stopped horn just for a sort of sonorous effect, right? So when I get to harder stopped horn stuff, we also, if we have time to not use our hand, we also have what's called a stopped mute, which is this. So that goes in there. Right? Except to play those two scales, I had to blow twice as hard for the stop note and play everything down a 1/2 step fingering to make it sound the same as the scale. Just to give you a sort of sense of where my brain is going when I have to play stop note. The stop mute is incredibly useful. I think at the season opener last year we played Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, and there's a note where I was playing fourth or second horn. I think it's in both horn parts where it's like a low stopped C sharp, and all the horn players go, we're playing Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, we gotta play the low stopped C sharp. So for weeks we're practicing this one darn note that's so hard to get, because I'll try and play it for you now. I didn't practice this. That note. It's very hard to stop notes, slow down. Incredibly hard because you got to blow, so I actually need to practice that before I show that one. But anyways, you can see where there's these technical things, right? Where it's like, whoa, okay, we got to figure out how to make that sound, and it's not easy, actually. Yeah. Okay, so that's a stop mute. I'm kind of jumping all over, but it's kind of fun, right? We're okay with that. Just since I'm on the mute thing, we also have something called a straight mute. A lot of brass instruments have this. So this other black instrument is a straight mute. It's more of just a soft sound or a sort of nasally sound, not so brassy and shiny. I'll just play that for you too. I'll play open first. Okay. So again, a very different sound, right? And that's just used purely for sonic interests, right? They write these in, they write brass players with all their mutes so that we have a totally different sound as a brass ensemble than with or without mutes, and with or without hand stopping, which is only a French horn thing, the stop notes, right? Compared to the trumpets. They do a bit of wah-wah, you know, wah-wah-wah. Oh, which is another effect that occasionally is written into our part, right? That we can actually use our hand to bend the note, so it would sound like this. Right? So, right, so there we are. We're up to Mozart's time where they had pieces of metal. They were switching in and out to change the series of notes, but still using their hand to get the extra notes they couldn't play. And then by kind of late Beethoven, just at the end of Beethoven's life, they were starting to try and figure out these sort of systems where they could have those different pieces of tubing sort of attached to the horn and be able to have sort of like a very rudimentary valve that would then switch, so they didn't have to pull each piece out in and out, and they could switch it from one tube to the next for different key tonalities, right? Which is essentially the early version of what I have here. I have a valve. When I press it down, it simply switches the airflow from one tube to the next to change that harmonic series. What this did, though, was it also really influenced music written for horn in the sense that we learned to transpose, because they wrote all the notes the same according to what's going on in the orchestra. Like if the orchestra's in C major and they've written us all as Cs, we're playing that basic note. But depending, this gets a bit complicated too, depending on if the orchestra changed keys, they would flip the tube but keep it written the same. So we basically, in our parts, have a lot of times where standard modern horn is written for horn in F, that's the basic length I'm playing. But in lots of opera, lots of Mozart or earlier, it's written for horns in different keys. Horn in C, horn in D, horn in B flat, horn in E flat, horn in E. And it's all written the same, but that means in my brain, I have to play a different note than what's written on the page. For a Mozart symphony coming up, the Jupiter Symphony, it's horn in C. So I'm going down a fourth. Everything I see on the page written as a note, I have to play down a fourth. I have to switch the key signature in my head and play the notes down a fourth. Once you get it in your brain, and it's like automatic translation, you're just sort of going along in your other language, playing those notes in your brain down a fourth, right? That's not too complicated for me. But where it gets really complicated is playing opera, I find. Because I also play in Vancouver Opera. I am third horn of the Vancouver Opera Orchestra. I've been doing that since 2006, I think. And playing opera is quite different than playing symphony orchestra music. We're down in the pit in the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, and we're playing these 3-hour-long pieces that go all over the place, depending what's going on with the singers on stage, and anything can happen in opera, is what we say. But in a lot of the mid-1800s operas, for like Verdi operas, he got to the point where he was switching the key of the horn every 2 minutes in the piece, right? So my part, when I play a Verdi opera, will be 30 pages long or more, and it'll be written horn in E for this much of one page, and then I'm thinking, okay, down a semitone, this is my new key signature, and then it'll switch, horn in D, and then I'm going down a minor third, right? And this is my new key signature, and then it'll switch to horn in G, up a tone from the written note, this is my new key signature in my head. And it keeps switching to every conceivable transposition for that entire 3-hour performance. It's mentally very exhausting. Now, some people that play in the Metropolitan Opera, they play operas all year long. They get to the point where they're just doing it automatically. I play 2 operas a year with Vancouver Opera. And if I have next year we're playing Tosca, I will have that part 2 months ahead, and 80% of the practice I'm doing is mental practice. I'm sitting there looking at the page, and I'm going through in my head, what note am I actually supposed to be playing at any given time?
Do you mark your page for yourself?
Yes. When I first did my first opera and I was coming in and it was new and I had my first 3-hour opera and I was just like, because it's so easy, we have to count notes. Sometimes we're counting for a minute. We're paying attention to the conductor, we're paying attention to what's going on. We're busy, something happens, and then all of a sudden you come back and you go to play and you think, what transposition am I in at this moment? I can't even remember. And you're looking for it on the page, trying to figure out what was the last transposition I was just in. And my colleague at the time, he said, Heather, this is what you got to do. You got to write it in the top corner. He showed me this little bracket, horn in whatever, here's the key signature. And if you see my opera parts, every time it changes, it's right in the margin, right there, so that visually I look at the page and I can see immediately for myself in my own little cue what transposition I should be thinking of. Yes?
Do other brass instruments have to deal with this?
Not much. The trumpets occasionally transpose B flat and C trumpets. They have 2 different size trumpets that are the most common. There are a few other. For example, in a Mahler symphony or something, there would be a smaller E flat trumpet. So they occasionally do some transposition, but really French horn, because of our history of these funny crooks and this interesting history, is the only one that is just traditionally written in all these different keys. So it's fun, it's different, it's a real mental challenge, And it's just a part of the horn playing that you as an audience might never ever see. If you come see me play Mozart Symphony, you think, well, those sound like pretty easy notes. And they are pretty easy notes, because I'm only playing da, da, dee, dee, da, dee, 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 da, da, whatever those series of notes are, right? There's only so many notes that were available in Mozart's time. But in the meantime, I'm transposing in my head out of what was written into whatever key he asked for at that time, and then playing it on a modern horn. So it's a little different. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, so that's a bit of the history of the French horn itself and how we play it. Any questions about that part? And then I'm happy to keep talking about lots of other stuff. Yes?
Is there any software or something that you can sort of just like rewrite?
Well, that's what my husband asks me all the time. He's like, why don't they just rewrite the parts and put all the notes in the right thing? But it's very interesting because it's such a tradition. Sorry?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, the question was, is there any software involved? Could they just change the parts, change the notes on the parts so that I didn't have to do the mental game? Which sometimes I have to admit, I think, oh, I wish this could just be transposed for me. But because of the history of the horn, it's almost like a sense of pride, for one, that we are playing these original series of notes and figuring it out. But someone like Andrew Clark beside me, who is a natural horn player, world-class natural horn player, his brain and my brain think completely differently. So when I'm seeing transposition, I'm thinking at a key signature and how far down or up I'm going from the written note. When he's thinking transposition, he's thinking that harmonic series of the natural horn, because that's what he's trained in. He knows immediately whether that note would be an open note or a stopped note, because he's so used to knowing which note of which series would be played at any time. And so he would never want it transposed because he's actually thinking in those open harmonics and the stop notes and just playing it on a modern horn. It's just so interesting. And we have these discussions between the two of us because he's like, all right, I say, what key are we in, what transposition? And he's, oh, well, you could do a stop note because that's the seventh partial or whatever. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Yeah.
Or just one other question. In brass instruments, sometimes they're silver, sometimes they're shiny, sometimes they're matte.
Right.
Is there a qualitative difference?
Yes, sometimes the brass instruments are silver or gold or brassy or shiny or matte. Is there a qualitative difference? Not for you folks. Some brass players would debate me on that one. The matte, like someone asked me earlier, is this an older horn? No, it's just an unlacquered horn. This horn's about 30 years old. But you can have a much older horn that has a lacquer on it that keeps it shiny at all times. And you can have a much newer horn that does not have lacquer, that sort of gets kind of messy looking, older looking, right? Okay. Yeah, patina. If I shined it up with brass, it would be super shiny, and then it would just get old looking again. But people do feel there's a difference between certain amounts of brass, which is a combination of metals, or silver or gold. Some have gold-plated horns. Some people have gold-plated bells. Some people have special combinations of metals because they feel like it resonates differently. And again, I'm not so much of a technical equipment person. But Andrew would be the one to give a talk about which metals he's choosing when he's building French horns. He actually makes French horns. This is the natural horn player. So it's kind of fun. So there is a difference, but not directly in terms of newer or older instruments and how it functions. Yeah. Yes?
How much does it cost?
How much does it cost? They're nowhere near as expensive as stringed instruments, generally. A professional level French horn would, at this point, be somewhere between the $10,000 to $25,000 range, which if you talk to a string instrument, that's considered cheap. And there's probably 10 to 15 main horn makers in the world that would make these professional level instruments. Not a ton. And then there's kind of boutique horn makers too that just make a couple a year, but they're either very in demand, they've got a year's waiting list, or or they just make them for themselves. Andrew tends to make more of the natural horns, so he's just making more of the curly ones and all the crooks, and he's sending them off to his friends in Europe who are playing natural horn in some of the early music ensembles. Although he does make his own modern horns as well. So he's always showing up with a different horn saying, oh, I'm playing my new triple, look at this one, and I got a different wrap on it, and the tubes are going that way, and he's just telling us all about his physical inventions of what he's thinking about. And again, I'm usually kind of like, ooh, wow.
Would you be able to transfer your skills to the horns that he makes?
He makes modern horns, which I could pick up and play, and I certainly have. Yes, absolutely. He makes the early hand horns, which I am not a specialist in, and I don't really play hand horn, although I can easily blow through them and get the series of notes, but I'm not good at playing the whole series of music with the hand. And that's what specialists more in Europe would be doing with the early music ensembles, like Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, all those early music ensembles. The horn players would be playing, if they're playing period instruments, would be playing a hand horn. Yeah. Any other questions about that in general? Yes.
Why is it called a French horn?
That's kind of just an anomaly. There's some different theories and stories why it's called a French horn. It was used in Germany and all over Europe back in the day, hunting horn. It was more known in France at some point, and someone somehow called it a French horn. Internationally, this is just called a horn. Technically, it's not a French horn, but everyone knows it by French horn, and jazz players call every instrument a horn, so it gets confusing, right? Very different than an English horn. Does anyone know what an English horn is? Cor anglais. So it's like an oboe. If you ever come to the orchestra, see the long black instrument with a double reed. And the English horn is a longer, lower version of that with a small metal tube and then another double reed. That is called the English horn because of a mistranslation. The metal tube coming out of it bends. It's an angled bend. So it was a cor anglais, angled horn. And when they translated it to English, anglais being the same as English, it's actually a mistranslation. So if you ever want to know why the English horn is called English horn, it's because somebody didn't translate right from the French. So there's no relation between French horn and English horn at all. Yeah, so yes.
I did read a while ago about children encouraged to do music. I guess it develops their brain more. Have you heard that?
Well, she's just asking about children being encouraged to do music, developing the brain. There's tons of research out there that music affects our brain in all sorts of interesting ways, children and adults, but certainly children as they're growing up, absolutely. Music, movement. There's all sorts of interesting books about that. I'm just reading a book called Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. I don't know if some of you have read it. About all the theories about how music affects us, different parts of our brain. It's fascinating and quite sad that nowadays there's less music education for children. We do have, in the symphony, we do have a children's series that we work on. So we actually go and perform for grade 4 students right across the whole district every year and donate some of our time to that education and getting kids to experience the symphony the first time. And we also have kids shows that we did, like the Cuban Festival weekend last weekend, we actually had a kids show specifically on Saturday afternoon as well. So we do try and include children in the symphony audience in one way or another and educate them as well. But yeah, it's so influential on us, yeah. It's funny because I'm talking about Andrew and he's the horn maker and the engineer of all the tubing. My particular interest is really in how the body works. I mean, we're using our bodies to produce sound, we as all orchestral musicians. And when I was, I studied, I was in symphony orchestra actually from the age of 13. I was in youth orchestras. It's really my musical home where I feel absolute most at ease is right in the middle of a symphony orchestra, much more so than being a soloist. That's not my thing. And I went on to study 2 music degrees right after high school, performance music degrees, one at UBC and then one out in Quebec City in the Conservatoire of Music in Quebec, which is a French-based program, more like they do in the conservatories in France. And by the time I had finished those 2 degrees, I was actually a bit of a physical mess. There is a really high injury rate for classical and professional musicians in general, partly because we as a society aren't really taught much about how our bodies move and how they're designed to move, and partly because playing a musical instrument requires holding the same general posture for many, many hours a day. Really complex motion, tiny muscles, and holding that same posture for hours and hours and hours of practice. So directly coming out of my music studies, I had lots of sort of physical problems that I was trying to sort out and get treatments, and I couldn't figure out, how do I not have back pain when I'm playing my horn, or shoulder pain and everything. And then I went and studied something called the Alexander technique, which is part of my career now. I teach this technique as well. And it's really an educational system for teaching people how their bodies move and how we can be aware of our movement patterns and how we can learn to change them according to design. So I studied it privately for myself at the beginning because I was kind of desperate to figure out how does this work? And we're not really taught about our bodies. Even the horn teachers I had would sort of try and teach us how to play horn, but they really didn't know why my shoulder was getting sore trying to hold the horn, right? And I got so fascinated with that technique that I then studied a 3-year training program to become an internationally certified teacher of the Alexander technique. I work with musicians. I have worked with many musicians because it's well known in music and theater. We were just talking about it. It's quite well known in theater as well, because professional musicians, actors, anyone using their body to perform needs to actually know what we're doing and have a real awareness of our patterns. So I've worked with many musicians. I've taught at a couple international music camps, taught Alexander technique, and then I teach privately out of my home studio. Now that I live in Nanaimo, the music world. If I was living in New York, I might work just with musicians, who knows? But I teach it to everyone and anyone because it's valid for everything, right? All of us are using our bodies at all times and can move with more ease and efficiency. So that has been part of my whole music career, in that when I started to become aware of my postural habits and look for more ease and know how to move with more ease, I started to play with more ease and have less injuries. And I actually won my first audition for the opera orchestra after just coming out of my 3-year training course with the Alexander technique. I was practicing half as much as I had been after my music degree, but with twice as much ease and efficiency and playing better than I had before. So I am quite convinced for myself that I wouldn't have had a professional career without also studying the body and how it moves and teaching that and delving into that technique. So it's been a fascinating part of my music career. It influences everything I do with the horn. I think about it and use it as much as possible, this tool, all the time, to make horn playing as easy and efficient as possible. From that, I've also, in the last 1.5 years, become a fitness instructor for 60 plus for the city of Nanaimo. Many of you are in my fitness classes. Thank you for coming today. And I never realized how much my music career would influence even my fitness, right? Just the fact of patterns and beats and movement and coordination that we work all the time in music with these 8-bar patterns. I can hear the music, I can switch patterns and work with all of that. Makes it so much easier. And then my training in body awareness really helps me know what we're actually doing in movement. So it's been a really interesting part of the career. I was thinking too about how much horn playing is really almost like doing a fitness class. Like my daily practice, if I were, or horn players, brass players, all musicians, but brass players essentially need to work out in a way that's a lot like a fitness workout, except it's much more specific to our lips. So almost all brass players have a set routine they will do pretty much every day. That set routine will have different parts to it. There'll be a little bit of a warm-up or noodling just to get warmed up. It's like just stretching your arms, figuring out where you're at that day. Then there's a bit more warm-up where we're extending our range. Then there's a lot, and every horn player will do this, a lot of exercises where we're just blowing through these open harmonic series. We're trying to get our lips and our air coordinated through all the different layers of the horn. I can give a little demo of that. I do some version of it pretty much every time I practice. So it would sound like this. Add a length of tubing. And so on and so on and so on. With many, let me get the microphone. So I would go through all the different combinations of both the B flat and the F horn. You may not have noticed, I actually have a thumb valve as well, right here. So I have a double set of tubing because I have a short horn and a long horn, and for each of the short and long horn, I have a set of tubes. So the total combination of valve combinations is something like 12 different combos. And I would be blowing through all those different combinations in those little exercises, and there's a whole bunch of variations of them, to wake up my lips and my air to get everything flowing within all those different combinations. Every horn player will do some version of that every day. So, because that's how we have to get that moving. Yeah.
With this integration of music to us primates, there's a difference between humans and other primates in that music connects with our whole brain, and other primates, it does not connect with the whole brain. That's relatively new research. I wonder if they have any feedback.
I don't know that much about that, but he just said there's a difference that they found out between us and other primates, that when we are using music or involved with music, it's connecting to our whole brain, and other primates, it's not the whole brain being involved. So music is this really amazing, amazing sort of stimulus for our brain that I don't know that much difference between that and other primates, but that's interesting research for sure. Yeah, and there's a documentary called Alive Inside. Have any of you seen that? It's about using music with dementia patients, and it just brings their brain right. Some of them have been almost non-functional for months, if not years, and it brings their brain right back sort of awake and alive because the music triggers something that nothing else can touch. It's a very interesting documentary. Yes, question?
Very important is your breathing technique. It's not only from the lungs, right? Opera singers that come from, is that correct? Breathing for the stomach muscles?
Well, yes. Breathing is, so very important, he was saying, is the breathing technique. How does that work? Opera singers really breathe. Yes, I mean, we can only breathe from our lungs. The air only goes into our lungs. And people assume because we're brass players that we have a very big lung capacity. I think what's more important is that we're always looking for as much movement as possible. Many people breathe, but they've kind of stopped the movement of their rib cage. It's not very, not very expansive, not very fluid. It's a bit fixed. Whereas opera singers, when you see them, they move. It's incredible. So that they're using their whole breathing function to allow them to take in as much air as possible. Because I had sort of not efficient movement habits, I started French horn as a 10-year-old, and I wasn't taught actually very well how to breathe. I actually had a lot of tension involved in my breathing. And for many years, I actually wasn't using the movement correctly to allow the breath to be fully as helpful as it could be. And that's where I got, from the Alexander technique, I finally really could start to unhook those patterns and understand how is breathing actually designed. Even I went and taught in Quebec at an international brass school, brass players from all over the world, young college-age students, and I would give workshops on breathing, and I would ask them, okay, what's your diaphragm? Where is it? How do your ribs move? What, all of these questions, and most of them do not have the correct information, right? And my first teacher said, your diaphragm's this big muscle. If I punch you in the stomach and you tighten here, that's your diaphragm. That's completely incorrect. I mean, she was well-meaning, but your diaphragm's a tiny, thin parachute-like muscle that spreads out in a completely different way, right? So it's very interesting. We're just not taught very well how our body works, and that influences our our careers in music and everything else. Even if you're sitting at a computer and you have a repetitive strain injury, that influences your use and movement. Yeah, so, we're running out of time already. It's just so much fun. I also play in the opera orchestra. I'm just trying to think, is there anything you want to know about the difference between playing opera and symphony music, or do we have any general questions about anything I've talked about? I was going to say, when we do our daily routine on French horn, so much of it is like a fitness class. In a fitness class, we'll do range of motion, we'll do strength, we'll do some cardio, we'll do some balance, we'll do some of these different things. On the horn, we do the exact same thing. We do some tonguing, we do some legato, we do some long tones, we do some attacks, we do all these different variations in technical ability on the horn to get our chops, what we call our chops, working well. So even if I have a Mozart Jupiter Symphony coming up in March, I'll be looking at that music and practicing it mentally and making sure I've got the right thought. But mostly what I'm practicing is the endurance, the cardio, the flexibility, the attacks, all of the technical aspects of playing horn, much more than necessarily practicing the actual orchestral music to that degree. Yes?
Some blown instruments use circular breathing.
Yeah.
Do you ever have to use?
I don't do circular. So the question is about something called circular breathing. Some people do manage to use something called circular breathing, where they basically are blowing out from their lungs out, and then they expand their cheeks and fill their cheeks with air, and then use the cheek muscles to continue blowing out while they breathe in through their nose to refill their lungs. And if they get very good at this, and you'll see a few wind players sometimes doing this, where their cheeks are going in and out, and they're playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. And Dizzy Gillespie, right? Yeah, but yeah, some of them the cheeks just go out because they play with their cheeks out. But if you see, like our oboe player in the symphony does it occasionally for a long phrase, the cheeks will go out and in, out and in, and he won't be actively taking a breath, but he's breathing in as he's blowing out using cheek muscles. And continuous. And young brass players, this is like the talk of college. They get a straw and a glass of water and they try and blow continuously while you're trying to breathe in, while you're trying to figure out what to keep blowing out. And of course, you can't keep the bubbles going in the glass of water. People spend hours doing something like that, trying to figure that out. As with something we call something like double tonguing or triple tonguing. So if I'm starting a note, I'm using my tongue to go two, 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 or do, 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 to make the air start very cleanly. But then we get into fast passages where I go, that's as fast as I can get my tongue going. So if I need faster than that, I do something called tu-ku, 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 tu, which is called the double tongue. Or people practice a triple tongue, the different patterns of it to get it going super fast so that they can play. So there's all these weird technical things that you're practicing that add into the music, that people practice or not. Yes?
I am curious to know what attracted a 10-year-old to the French horn.
Oh, what attracted the 10-year-old to the French horn? Well,
Let me tell you.
that's my mom sitting in the front row. When I was 10, I told her I either wanted to play the bagpipes or the French horn. She ran out really fast and got me a French horn and put me in band camp, just made sure that the French horn was it. But I think also, the French horn is just such a visually beautiful instrument. You see it on the Christmas cards. I think as a 10-year-old, you see that and you think, wow, that's cool. And also, it does have a reputation as being a difficult instrument. Some people say the most difficult instrument. I don't know if I would agree with that. All instruments are difficult in different ways. But I do say, I think in a way, the French horn is the most treacherous instrument. In that when we go to play a note, if we don't have that buzz and that air dead on right at the right vibration, what we do is we cack or crack that note, and the sound is really a splia sound. It's obvious, and once in a while, even at the symphony, you might hear the horn players come in and you'll hear this clia sort of sound instead of a da, nice clear sound. That's called a cack or a crack or a splat, or we have all sorts of names for it. And if you're playing a violin and your finger is just slightly off, yeah, you'll be a little out of tune, but not every audience member will notice that. But when you play the horn and you're just slightly off, everyone notices. So that, in that way, I think of it as a treacherous instrument. It's hard. We're playing up in that high harmonic range where notes are close together, and boy, it doesn't take much to not place the buzz and the air exactly right and not hit a note dead on. But I was thinking maybe as a 10-year-old, I don't know, I heard it was a difficult instrument. I thought, oh yeah, let me try this. I don't know. But it's been lots of fun. Last question, because we're almost out of time. Yeah.
I'm curious about the movement and playing the instrument.
Yes.
Because you're in the orchestra, you're sitting down
Yes.
all the time. So how do you reconcile the movement and posture with all that sitting?
Yes, we're in the orchestra, we're sitting down a lot of time. Yes, we can have, and my opera rehearsals are 3.5 hours, right? And the operas are 3 hours long often. And she's asking me about the movement. How do I reconcile staying free? But remember, I teach even an active sitting where you're really upright, you're in balance, and you're slightly moving at all times. You're really using your body to stay fluid. And even within sitting on a chair, I'm thinking of spirals, I'm thinking of curves, I'm thinking of balance, I'm thinking of ease. I'm moving at all times, both holding the horn up. Where are my shoulders? Where's my support from the ground? So I'm using all of that even in an active sitting moment. And then, of course, recovering from hard performances as well, because in some hard moment you might crunch down and then you have to realize, okay, I don't need to be tightening now. I've played that high note, the challenge is past, and now I'm going to see if I can reestablish as much ease and fluidity as possible. So yeah, it does influence everything, seated, standing, every type of music. I didn't even tell the stories about my other, well, we have 2 minutes left. So 1 minute left. Some of the fun things I did to pay for my Alexander training, I actually was on Parliament Hill, the red coats and the black bear skin, the marching band. I did that for 4 summers, marching away with my French horn, standing still in 42 degrees in a wool coat and a black bear skin hat, because that paid for my Alexander training. I got to play for the opening ceremony of the Olympics in Vancouver. The opera orchestra was the orchestra that was engaged, so I was on this stage for the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. That was super fun and exciting. Some of the youth orchestras I played with, youth meaning there's a professional orchestra across Canada called the National Youth Orchestra of Canada. We toured Europe, we toured 6 countries in Europe. I toured all the way across Canada, every province. So that was super exciting. 2016, I got this email saying, oh, we need to hire a horn player for this pop singer named Adele. Would you be interested? And I was like, who's Adele? I asked my husband. And he makes fun of me to the day. Because it sort of came out of nowhere. They said, we got your name from someone in New York. And I thought, I don't know anyone in New York. But anyways, I got to play the backup all-women brass band for the Adele shows in Vancouver at Rogers Arena. That was super fun. So there's been a lot of really interesting non-orchestral music as well. Chamber music, touring. It's been just a really fascinating go-round. And I love playing the symphony. I hope that this gives you a little insight into the horns section. I didn't even talk about the horn section in the symphony, but I know, you have to come back next year for more. So much to talk about, gosh. Hope it gives you a bit of insight, and then certainly we have 2 more concerts this year. March is Mozart and some other fascinating music. April, unfortunately, I won't be playing the April concert because I'm playing an opera in Vancouver instead. It's this juggling. But they're always fun concerts, and I hope to see some of you at the Symphony as well, and feel free to wave or tell me if you're there, right? So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Okay, bye.